Keanu Reeves stepped onto the international flight, his calm yet magnetic presence accentuated by a perfectly tailored black suit that fit his tall, lean frame. A simple white shirt without a tie emphasized his elegant yet understated appearance. He wasn't flashy, nor was he trying to hide. Keanu was just another passenger among many. But even as he tried to blend into the crowd, his composed demeanor and sharp gaze inadvertently drew the attention of those around him. "Isn't that Keanu Reeves?" a young man whispered to his friend, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Shh, don't bother him," the friend muttered, pulling him back. Keanu paid no mind. He was used to these kinds of looks, but today he wasn't Keanu Reeves, the movie star. He was simply a man on his way to somewhere. He ascended the stairs leading to the plane, each step unhurried and steady, as if this space was as familiar to him as an old friend. Inside the cabin, the soft glow of yellow lights created a warm, tranquil atmosphere. The cool air from the vents gently brushed against the passengers, soothing their fatigue after a long wait. Keanu entered, his eyes sweeping over each face on the plane. He wasn't in a rush, nor did he miss any details. In the front row, a little girl, about 8 years old, clutched a pink teddy bear tightly against her chest. Her sparkling eyes gazed out the window as she chirped excitedly to her mother, "Mommy, does the plane fly as fast as Superman?" The young mother smiled, pulling the little girl to rest on her shoulder as she whispered, softly, "Faster, sweetheart. We'll even soar above the clouds." Not far away, a middle-aged businessman in a wrinkled suit sat with exhaustion etched into his features. Dark circles under his eyes hinted at sleepless nights. He tapped away at his laptop, the rhythmic clicking of the keyboard like the monotonous hum of workplace stress. Every so often, he sighed and sipped black coffee from a plastic cup on his tray. At the back of the cabin, a group of young adults laughed loudly, sharing a phone between them. They watched short videos, occasionally bursting into laughter, oblivious to the irritated glances thrown their way. A young flight attendant, dressed neatly in her uniform, walked gracefully down the aisle. Her hair was styled into a high bun, and her bright smile radiated warmth and professional charm. She leaned down gently to ask an elderly passenger, "Would you like some more water, sir?" Keanu smiled faintly. A small yet vibrant world unfolded before his eyes, each person caught up in their own story. He continued toward a seat near the emergency exit, a spot he instinctively favored. For Keanu, it was a familiar place. Not too far from the aisle, not too close to the crowd, and, more importantly, a spot where he could see everything. He carefully lifted his compact carry-on suitcase and placed it in the overhead bin. There was something deliberate and unhurried about his every movement, as though the world held no reason to rush. Once seated, Keanu leaned back into the chair, exhaled a slow breath, and loosened the collar of his shirt. His gaze drifted across the passengers around him one last time before he closed his eyes. The hum of the plane's engines began to rise, a steady, calming sound, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The cool touch of the air conditioning filtered through his clothes, softening the lingering thoughts in his mind. Keanu couldn't remember the last time he had such a quiet moment to himself. "A few hours of peace, that's all I need," he thought to himself. But sometimes peace is just a fragile veil, a thin curtain hiding the unexpected. Outside the window, the deep blue sky stretched endlessly, streaked with white clouds that drifted like wisps of smoke. Inside the cabin, no one knew what lay ahead. Keanu thought it would be great if the audience watching could leave a subscription to the channel and share where they're watching from in the comments section. "Oh, sorry everyone. There seems to be some confusion. Let's get back to the story. Keanu slowly opened his eyes, a subtle but unshakable feeling tugging at his chest, a vague yet distinct premonition, like the calm before a storm. The steady hum of the airplane's engine blended seamlessly with the tranquil atmosphere, like a soothing background melody calming the minds of passengers lost in their own worlds. 2 hours had passed since takeoff, and the soft glow of the cabin lights bathed the space in a serene, cloud-like ambiance. Keanu Reeves sat quietly near the emergency exit, his eyes half closed, his breathing slow and measured. He looked like someone savoring the rare, fleeting moments of peace in an otherwise chaotic life. Suddenly, a faint clattering noise broke the calm, a sound small enough to go unnoticed by most, but sharp enough to jolt those nearby. Keanu opened his eyes, his brows lifting slightly, like a ripple disturbing a still pond. He didn't move, only observed from the corner of his eye, a growing sense that something wasn't right. In the aisle, a middle-aged man suddenly stood up. He wore an old, oversized black coat, as though trying to conceal his frail frame. His steps were hurried and unsteady, as if he were burdened by something heavy. A few passengers raised their heads to look at him, curiosity flickering in their eyes. A flight attendant further down the cabin arched her brow but maintained the polite smile on her face. The man stopped in the middle of the cabin, right in the aisle. He yanked a backpack off his shoulder and dropped it onto the floor with a thud, the sudden motion startling a few people. A strange tension began to ripple outward. He crouched down, rummaging through the bag with trembling hands and ragged breaths. The cabin seemed to fall silent, as though a song had been cut off mid-note. The man abruptly stood up, holding in his hands a makeshift device, a small metal box with blinking red lights and a tangled web of wires. He lifted it high, his bloodshot eyes scanning the cabin as he roared, "Everybody shut up! Don't move! This plane belongs to me now!" His declaration hit like a bomb, detonating the fragile calm within the sealed confines of the cabin. Screams erupted, children wailed in terror. A woman in the front clutched her young daughter, pressing the girl's face into her chest and whispering shakily, "Don't be scared, sweetheart. Don't be scared." A man tried to stand, but when he saw the glint of a knife in the hijacker's hand, he froze, his face going pale before collapsing back into his seat. The air felt heavy, frozen, all eyes locked onto the man, but no one dared move. The hijacker's gaze swept through the rows, searching for signs of defiance. His breathing was erratic, his hand shaking as he gripped the knife. He stumbled forward and seized the wrist of a young flight attendant standing nearby. She gasped and shrieked, unable to react before he yanked her toward him. A sharp blade pressed against her neck, its cold edge catching the cabin's dim yellow light. "Open the cockpit door now. You've got 3 minutes, or she dies," he snarled, his voice shaking as though he wasn't entirely in control of himself. The air grew so thick it was almost suffocating. A few passengers quietly bowed their heads, sobbing silently. The cries of frightened children punctuated the tension, amplifying the madness in the hijacker's eyes. Keanu remained seated. His eyes were wide open now, fixed on the man wreaking havoc. His gaze was sharp, yet inexplicably calm. No fear, no panic. He watched everything in silence. The way the hijacker gripped the knife, not firm, slightly unsteady. The device in his hand, blinking lights, but its construction appeared crude. The passengers around him, heads bowed, trembling, avoiding the hijacker's gaze. Keanu's eyes briefly landed on a little girl in the row ahead, clutching a stuffed bear. Her wide, tear-filled eyes met his, silently pleading for something, anything. Keanu's heart sank for a moment. He took a deep breath, his hand gripping the armrest, his broad shoulders steady and unmoving like a fortress in the midst of a storm. "Open the cockpit door," the hijacker shouted again, pressing the knife closer to the flight attendant's neck. She sobbed uncontrollably, her body trembling in his grasp. Keanu didn't move, but inside him, every instinct was coming alive. He quietly regulated his breathing, his gaze locked on the hijacker. Time was running out. If I don't do something, who will? In his mind, a plan was already taking shape. Keanu Reeves was ready. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken. All the peaceful sounds from earlier, the laughter, the soft chatter of children, the clicking of keyboards, had vanished completely, replaced by a deathly silence. Only the muffled cries of a child and the labored breathing of a few passengers remained. The dim yellow lights cast down, reflecting on the tense faces of everyone, highlighting the beads of sweat trickling down foreheads. The terrorist stood in the aisle, the cold blade of his knife pressed against the throat of a young flight attendant. His bloodshot eyes burned with a mixture of rage and fear. His entire body was taut, like a string about to snap, his trembling hand gripping the woman's wrist tightly. A middle-aged man, roughly in his 50s, sitting close to the aisle, summoned every ounce of courage to speak. His voice quivered, weak yet sincere, as though he were trying to convince himself more than the terrorist. Please, calm down. We can talk. You don't have to do this." The terrorist spun around, his bloodshot, hollow eyes those of a desperate man cornered with nowhere to run. He lunged at the older man, shoving him roughly back into his seat. The man's shoulder hit the hard edge of the seat with a sickening thud, and he groaned in pain. The sharp sound of the impact echoed through the silent cabin, like an alarm bell tolling inside everyone's head. "Shut up! I don't need your advice. Sit down!" The terrorist roared hoarsely, as if, struggling to keep himself together. The entire cabin fell still. A few passengers turned their faces away, unable to bear the scene. A young woman nearby covered her mouth, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. An elderly man clutched the crucifix hanging from his neck, his lips moving in silent prayer. Up front, a little girl hugged her stuffed bear, curled tightly into her mother's arms. Her face was pale, her wide eyes glistening as they darted around before settling on Keanu. She tugged gently at her mother's sleeve, whispering in a voice as soft as a breeze. "Mom, what is that man going to do?" The mother forced a trembling smile to reassure her daughter, but her shaking hands betrayed her fear. She pulled the girl closer, as if shielding her from the invisible terror that surrounded them. Keanu sat still, his eyes fixed ahead, never leaving the terrorist for even a second. He observed everything, slowly, deliberately. The terrorist was losing control. His movements were no longer steady. His hand holding the knife trembled. The countdown timer on the makeshift device blinked on and off, the numbers steadily, ticking downward. The passengers around him were frozen, terrified, paralyzed, helpless. No one dared move or speak another word. A sharp thought sliced through Keanu's mind like lightning. This man wasn't a professional. He had no plan. He was scared, and his fear turned him into an unpredictable bomb waiting to explode. His heartbeat pounded faster, but there was no sign of panic. He inhaled deeply, keeping his breathing steady, his gaze sharp and cold like a blade. In a far corner, a man secretly held up his phone, recording the scene. Another passenger bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. Some passengers gripped each other's hands tightly, as if that small connection could anchor them to something safer. Keanu's hand gripped the armrest firmly. A familiar question echoed in his mind, clear and resonant as a bell tolling in the silence. If I don't do something, who will? Who will protect them? Who will get that little girl home? Safely? A quiet anger stirred deep within him. Not the kind that caused recklessness, but one that became a silent force, a strength waiting to be unleashed. Keanu slowly lifted himself out of his seat, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the narrow aisle. He stood. The click of a seatbelt unbuckling made a few people flinch and glance up. A young woman's eyes widened with fear as she whispered urgently, "What? What are you doing? Don't do this." Keanu didn't answer. He stepped forward, each footfall slow and deliberate. There was no haste, no hesitation. Every step carried a weight that felt almost tangible, as though the air itself moved to clear a path for him. The terrorist snapped his head around, his eyes narrowing with suspicion and fury as he saw Keanu approaching. He yanked the flight attendant closer, pressing the blade tighter against her neck, his voice trembling as he screamed, "What are you doing? Stop! I said sit down." Keanu stopped a few steps away. His gaze locked onto the terrorist's bloodshot eyes, his voice low and steady, but cutting through the silence like steel. "Let her go. You don't want to do this." Keanu's words weren't loud or angry, but they carried a weight that made everyone hold their breath. It wasn't a plea. It was a quiet command. The cabin was silent again. No one moved. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Only the blinking red light on the makeshift device and Keanu's unblinking gaze filled the space. An invisible battle played out between the two men, one spiraling out of control, the other as unshakable as a mountain. The terrorist swallowed hard, his grip tightening, the conflict in his eyes clear as day. Keanu didn't look away, his steps closing the distance by another inch. "Stop this before it's too late." The entire cabin seemed to brace itself for a storm, and at its very center was Keanu, calm, unyielding, and ready to face whatever came next. The entire cabin was plunged into an eerie silence as Keanu Reeves stood up. The hum of the airplane outside the windows seemed to fade, giving way to the pounding heartbeat of every passenger in their chests. All eyes turned to him, fearful, astonished, and hopeful. Keanu was no longer just a passenger. He was the center of the storm, and everyone knew it. The soft yet deliberate sound of his footsteps echoed through the narrow space. Each step weighed heavily on the suffocating tension in the air, forcing even the terrorist to snap his head around, bloodshot eyes locking on to him. The terrorist, still gripping the flight attendant tightly, screamed, more as if he were trying to reassure himself than threaten others. "Stop! Sit down! I'm not kidding!" The cold blade in his hand pressed deeper into the flight attendant's pale neck, leaving a faint red mark on her skin. She whimpered in fear, tears streaming down her face as she silently begged for help. Keanu stopped, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the cabin floor. He didn't speak immediately. His razor-sharp gaze pinned the terrorist in place, not with anger, not with fear, but with a piercing clarity that seemed to slice through the man's deranged shell and expose the weak, desperate person inside. Keanu's voice rumbled through the air, low, steady and unmistakably final. "You need to stop. Don't let this go any further." The terrorist froze for a second. He squinted at Keanu, confused and furious, as if he couldn't believe someone dared to stand up to him. That calm voice, that unshakable stance, it unsettled him. He screamed like a cornered animal. "Who do you think you are? I said, sit down. You want to die?" Keanu didn't move. Instead, he took another step forward. That was it. The terrorist snapped completely. His hoarse, enraged scream tore through the cabin. "You want to die? Then I'll kill you." He released the flight attendant's wrist and lunged at Keanu, knife flashing in his hand. His speed was ferocious, his attack animalistic. A desperate lunge, like a beast going for the kill. Passengers screamed in terror. A woman covered her mouth, her face ghostly pale. A little girl clutched her teddy bear and cried into her mother's lap. But Keanu was different. To him, everything seemed to slow down. The man charged forward, arm raised, the knife driving downward. In the blink of an eye, Keanu shifted to the side, dodging the attack by a hair's breadth. His movement was precise and fluid, leaving the terrorist no time to react. In an instant, Keanu's firm hand shot out, grabbing the terrorist's wrist. A sickening crack echoed as he wrenched the man's wrist back. The knife clattered to the floor with a sharp clang. The terrorist cried out in pain, his face contorted, sweat pouring down his forehead. Keanu didn't stop. He pivoted, using the terrorist's momentum against him, and slammed him to the cabin floor with a force that made the entire plane tremble. Passengers flinched collectively at the impact. The terrorist lay sprawled on the floor, his wrist pinned, both arms locked in Keanu's iron grip. He thrashed weakly, shouting in desperation, "Let me go! You don't know who I am! Let me go!" Keanu leaned down, his face mere inches from the terrorist's, his voice dropping to a sharp, icy tone. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The cabin fell into a dead silence. It was as though everyone had forgotten to breathe. Every pair of eyes watched Keanu and the subdued terrorist at his feet in stunned disbelief. A flight attendant regained her composure and rushed over to retrieve the knife and the small device that had fallen onto the floor. The timer on the device was still ticking, numbers counting down toward 0. Keanu glanced at it, his expression darkening. The terrorist had one last card to play, but no one could be certain just how dangerous it really was. The young flight attendant who had been held hostage stood nearby, her cheeks still wet with tears. She looked at Keanu, her voice trembling. You saved me. Thank you." Keanu looked at her, his eyes softening slightly. "Are you okay? Step back." She nodded, her legs still shaky as she backed away. The terrorist lay on the floor, panting heavily. He no longer struggled, but his furious and desperate glare remained. Keanu straightened slowly, his gaze sweeping over the entire cabin. A strange, almost reverent stillness had settled over the passengers. Some were crying quietly, others covered their mouths as though unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Keanu's voice rang out, steady and strong. "Everyone, stay calm. Everything is under control." His words were like a cool breeze dispelling the suffocating shadow of fear. For the first time, a glimmer of hope flickered through the cabin. Keanu had done more than save the flight attendant. He had pulled everyone back from the brink of a nightmare. But he knew this wasn't over yet. The timer on the device continued to tick, and he had to make sure the threat was truly neutralized. In Keanu's eyes, the calm gave way to a resolute determination. The storm wasn't over yet, but he wouldn't let anyone else get hurt. The sound of beep, beep pierced through the air, sharp and jarring, shattering the silence that had momentarily fallen after Keanu's confrontation with the terrorist. It was like hammer blows, signaling an even greater threat lying in wait. The countdown timer was still running. On the small screen, bright red numbers relentlessly dropped. 0:45, 0:44, 0:43. The entire cabin erupted into chaos. The gasps, sobs, and frantic murmurs collided like a tragic symphony. An elderly man, gripping the seat with trembling hands, whispered prayers under his breath, his voice so shaky it was impossible to make out the words. A young woman burst into uncontrollable tears, burying her head into the shoulder of the person beside her. From across the cabin, a little girl clutching a teddy bear, tears shimmering in her eyes, softly asked her mother, "Mommy, is it going to explode?" The mother, pale as a sheet, whispered in broken breaths, "No, no, sweetheart. Someone will help us." Every pair of eyes now turned to Keanu Reeves, the man who stood tall amidst the chaos, like an anchor in a storm-tossed sea. His posture remained calm, unwavering, even as the numbers ticked down with each passing second. The crew rushed toward him, their faces pale with fear, but they could do nothing but watch. A male flight attendant stammered, You can't touch it. It could go off at any second." Keanu turned his head, his gaze steady but commanding. His voice was firm, low, and resolute, like an order that allowed no protest. "If I don't touch it, we won't have any time left. Trust me." Fearful, no one dared argue further. They backed away, giving him the space he needed. Keanu dropped to one knee on the floor, his steady hands reaching for the small metallic device. The cold surface of the casing sent a sharp chill through his palms. The red light blinked rapidly, as if mocking everyone's desperate hope. 0:35, 0:34. Keanu tilted his head, sharp eyes scanning every inch of the device. He slid open a narrow latch on the edge of the casing, the metal panel clicking away with a dry snap. Inside, a crude circuit board and a tangle of wires lay exposed. The entire cabin fell deathly silent, frozen in the grip of overwhelming fear. A female flight attendant clasped a hand over her mouth, whispering as if even the faintest sound might trigger the deadly box. "Do you know how to disarm it?" Keanu didn't answer. There was no time for questions. Every nerve in his body stretched taut as a wire. Memories surged through him, training, survival, countless brushes with death. He focused intently on the wires before him, scrutinizing every detail. One red wire, connected from the main circuit board to the countdown timer. One blue wire, linked to a backup power source. Any wire could be a trap. Cut the wrong one. He didn't want to think about that. But if he didn't act, no one on this flight would have a chance to live. 0028. 0027. Sweat beaded on Keanu's forehead, but his eyes remained sharp and resolute. Carefully, he lifted the red wire, his fingers gripping its connector, feeling its tension. Each passing second stretched into eternity. The countdown a cruel, relentless reminder. Cut it, or everything ends. Keanu gritted his teeth, drawing in a deep breath. From his pocket, he pulled out a small key, its edge thin and razor-sharp. Glancing around the cabin, he saw their pale, terrified faces staring back at him. Filled with hope, but also frozen with fear. "Trust me," he whispered, not to anyone in particular, but as if reassuring himself. 0-18. A0-17. In one swift, decisive motion, Keanu sliced through the red wire with the key. A faint click echoed, stark and clear in the terrifying silence. For one breathless moment, everyone seemed to freeze. The red light went dark. The countdown stopped. The beeping fell silent, and the screen turned black. The cabin exploded in a wave of relief. Cries and sobs of gratitude erupted from every corner, breaths of relief flowing through the air like a cleansing tide. A woman broke down into tears, clinging to the person beside her. "We're alive. We're really alive." The young mother held her daughter close, unable to speak through her sobs. The little girl looked at Keanu, her wide eyes glistening with tears. "He saved us, Mommy." Keanu relaxed his hands, gently setting the device onto the floor. He slumped back against the seat, his breaths slowing. In that moment, he was no longer a movie star, no longer Keanu Reeves as the world knew him. He was just a man who did what needed to be done. A flight attendant approached him, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. If it weren't for you." Keanu nodded slightly, offering a faint, reassuring smile. "It's over. Everything's okay now." The cabin lights slowly brightened again. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, still trembling with emotion. "We've overcome the emergency. Please remain calm. We will land safely as soon as possible." Applause erupted throughout the cabin, mingling with cries of joy and overwhelming relief. Keanu closed his eyes, drawing in a deep, steadying breath, his strong shoulders slumping as if he'd just set down an enormous burden. Something warm spread through his chest as he heard the renewed laughter, the murmurs of conversation, as if life itself had been restored to all of them. He had done it. They were safe. But deep inside, Keanu knew that this battle wasn't over. The plane descended, the low hum of the engines vibrating rhythmically, signaling that the stormy journey was about to end. Through the window, the runway lights emerged, blinking like distant lighthouses guiding a lost ship through the darkness. Inside the cabin, tension still lingered. Though the danger had passed, hundreds of hearts aboard still pounded in their chests, as if they couldn't quite believe they had escaped a nightmare. Keanu Reeves sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the night sky outside. Strands of black hair fell loosely over his forehead, his face unnervingly calm, as though what had just happened was merely an inevitable part of life. He loosened the collar of his shirt, his shoulders relaxing after those moments of extreme tension, yet deep in his eyes, something still lingered, a touch of weariness and a trace of thoughtfulness. A voice broke through the cabin speakers, warm but tinged with emotion. It was the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, our flight has landed safely. We extend our heartfelt thanks to you all for your composure and cooperation. We wish you a peaceful new day." A small ripple of applause began, hesitant at first but soon spreading throughout the cabin. The clapping swelled like a wave, carrying with it the happiness and gratitude of those who had just been granted another chance at life. As the aircraft door opened, light from the security vehicles outside poured into the cabin, revealing silhouettes of people waiting below. Security officers, rescue teams, and reporters had already gathered, ready to apprehend the terrorist and unravel the events that had transpired. 2 officers stepped onto the plane and headed straight for the hijacker. He was pulled to his feet from the floor, his hands bound tightly behind him. His face was pale and broken, a far cry from the raving madman he had been moments ago. Now he was little more than a crumpled figure consumed by despair and humiliation. Surrounded by security, he was led off the plane. Passengers near the aisle watched, some still unable to believe they had survived. When the chaos subsided, a flight attendant, the same woman who had been held hostage, walked slowly toward Keanu. Her eyes were still red, but her face bore a faint, relieved smile filled with gratitude. She stood before him, struggling to steady her voice as her emotions threatened to resurface. You saved all of us. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." She bowed deeply, her trembling hands clutching at the hem of her uniform to keep herself composed. "Thank you. Truly, thank you." Keanu gave her a gentle nod, a small, soft smile appearing on his face. His voice was calm and warm. "No need to thank me. I just did what needed to be done." From behind came the soft, hurried sound of footsteps. A little girl, clutching a teddy bear, ran up to him. Her neatly braided hair bounced with every step. She stopped in front of Keanu, looking up at him with wide, sparkling eyes. In those innocent eyes there was no longer fear, only admiration and trust. "Mister!" she exclaimed excitedly. "You're a superhero, aren't you? You beat the bad guy and saved everyone." Keanu looked down at her, his gaze softening like the moonlight reflecting on a still lake. He crouched to her eye level, his warm smile making her feel safe. Gently placing a hand on her small shoulder, he replied, "I'm no superhero. I'm just an ordinary person. Anyone can do what I did, as long as they're willing to stand up when it matters." The little girl tilted her head, pondering his words before breaking into a radiant smile. Hugging her teddy bear tightly to her chest as though it were a treasure, she beamed up at him. "But to me, you're a superhero." Keanu chuckled softly, ruffling her hair affectionately before standing up. He walked to the overhead compartment, retrieving his small carry-on bag. Outside the plane, the flashing lights of cameras flared relentlessly. A crowd had gathered below. Security teams, rescue personnel, and eager journalists all waiting to uncover the story of the hero who had saved the flight. But Keanu had no interest in any of that. With his bag in hand, he stepped down the stairs. The voices of reporters erupted, their questions blending into a clamor as they called out to him from the foot of the staircase. "Who saved the flight? Can you tell us what happened? Are you the hero everyone's talking about?" But Keanu simply bowed his head slightly, his loose hair falling to obscure part of his face. He moved through the crowd quietly, each step measured and steady. No one managed to stop him. No one got another word. Within moments, he blended seamlessly into the stream of passengers inside the airport, as unremarkable as a shadow. The distant sky had begun to pale to a soft blue, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds, chasing away the remnants of the night. Keanu paused for a brief moment, glancing up at the heavens. He knew he wasn't a hero. He had only done the right thing when no one else could. And, perhaps, that was enough. A new day was beginning. Behind him, passengers embraced one another, crying tears of joy and relief. But, for Keanu, that was all he needed, to walk away quietly, the same way he had come. The plane landed safely, and the story seemed to have come to a close. But in reality, it was only just beginning. Another journey was unfolding, not in the skies but across media platforms and in the hearts of people everywhere. The next morning, the world woke up to an explosion of shocking news. Videos capturing the moment Keanu Reeves subdued the terrorist and defused the countdown device spread like wildfire. From social media platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook to major news outlets, images of Keanu Reeves in a black suit, standing calm and composed amidst the chaos, were everywhere. Shaky footage taken by passengers on the flight now stood as proof of the courage and decisive action of one man in the face of danger. The videos went viral, amassing hundreds of millions of views within hours. Headlines dominated major news websites. Keanu Reeves saves plane in real life, a hero among us. Hero beyond the screen. Keanu Reeves and the moment that changed everything. Bravery beyond the movies. Keanu Reeves confronts terrorist on flight. Thousands of comments and shares flooded social media. We need more people like him in this world. If I were in that situation, would I have the courage Keanu did? An ordinary man did something extraordinary. But while the entire world hailed him as a hero, Keanu remained silent. He turned down interview requests from major TV channels and declined invitations to appear on famous talk shows. His representative issued a brief statement. Keanu doesn't want to be the center of this story. The world buzzed with anticipation, waiting for him to say something. Then, a few days later, when curiosity had reached its peak, Keanu Reeves appeared in a short video filmed on his own phone. There were no stage lights, no elaborate setup, just him, sitting in a simple room with soft, natural light filtering through a window. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes calm but deeply earnest, and his warm, steady voice resonated. I am not a hero. He paused briefly, letting the words sink into the hearts of those listening. There was no false humility or performative modesty in his tone. It was the simple truth, spoken by a man who lived by his own principles. I just did what any of us should do. When you see something wrong, don't turn away. Don't stand still. Take action. No matter how small, your actions can make a big difference. He lowered his head slightly, his gaze softening as though he was speaking directly and personally to every single viewer. We don't need to be superheroes. We just need the courage not to turn away when someone needs help. Don't just stand there, do something. Those final words rang like a bell in the hearts of millions. The video was less than 2 minutes long, but it created a wave more powerful than any blockbuster movie Keanu had ever starred in. Within hours of the video being posted, the hashtag #Don'tWatchDo began appearing across social media and quickly became a global trend. It was no longer just a slogan. It was a call to action, a movement to awaken courage and a sense of responsibility in everyone. Countless stories began to emerge. A group of students shared a video of themselves stopping a bullying incident at school, captioned, "Don't stand still. Don't watch do." A young man recorded himself helping a homeless person on the street, writing, "This world needs more kindness. Don't watch do." A young woman recounted how she stood up for another woman on a subway with a short caption, "Keanu was right. Action changes everything." Major media outlets covered the movement. Don't watch do. The movement changing the world sparked by a moment from Keanu Reeves. From one man's action, millions of hearts awakened. Schools began showing Keanu's video during assemblies, spreading the message that courage doesn't need to be grand. Sometimes It's simply standing up and saying no to what's wrong. A prominent journalist wrote, "We often wait for someone to step in and save the day, but Keanu reminded us that anyone can do what's right. We don't need to be superheroes. We just need to act." And somewhere, amidst the overwhelming flood of stories and news, Keanu Reeves remained silent. He rejected glory and refused to be made into an icon, but deep down, he knew that his actions had touched millions of lives. One morning, as he sat by a window, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a hand-drawn picture of a little girl hugging a teddy bear with a childlike message scrawled above. "Thank you for saving us. You're a superhero in my heart. You're don't watch, do." Keanu looked at the picture, and a faint smile crossed his lips. He knew the message had been delivered. And sometimes, one small act can create ripples that change the world. A week had passed since the fateful flight. The world was still abuzz with news of the hero in the sky, and the Chuck Don't Watch Do movement was spreading everywhere. The media relentlessly searched for Keanu Reeves, interviewed passengers from the flight, and analyzed every frame of the viral video. Yet, amidst the storm of public attention, Keanu remained completely silent. That afternoon, in a quiet little cafe on the outskirts of Los Angeles, Keanu sat alone. The cafe wasn't particularly eye-catching. Old wooden tables, dusty bookshelves resting quietly against aged brick walls. The space was filled with the aroma of freshly roasted coffee, mingling with the warm scent of freshly baked pastries. A soft jazz tune drifted lazily through every corner, like the gentle notes of a day's final melody. Keanu chose a table by the window. From there, he could watch the small street outside where people hurried by. A middle-aged man carrying a bouquet of roses walked briskly, likely bringing them home to someone he loved. A young woman sat cross-legged near a flower bed, engrossed in a thick book. An elderly couple strolled arm in arm, their pace leisurely, as though time no longer chased them. Keanu sat there, a natural part of the scene. He was still elegant in his black suit and unbuttoned white shirt collar. His demeanor remained calm as always, but in his quiet eyes lingered a weariness that was hard to hide, a look of someone who had carried too much of the world's gaze. On the table, his coffee sent up faint wisps of steam that curled in the air before vanishing. The phone in his pocket buzzed softly, pulling him from his thoughts. Slowly, Keanu took out the phone and swiped across the screen. A new message appeared from an unknown number. "Thank you. I was one of the passengers on that flight. Because of you, I learned that sometimes even the smallest act can change everything. You gave us hope and faith that I thought I'd lost." Keanu stared at the message, his eyes lingering for a long while. In the quiet room, the sounds of cars on the street outside seemed distant. No words were needed. The message on the screen alone was enough to touch his heart, to remind him of the true meaning behind what he had done. He set the phone down gently, his fingers tapping softly to the rhythm of the jazz music playing in the background. A faint smile appeared on his lips, simple and warm, like a soft breeze drifting through the window. Over the past days, Keanu had heard many people call him a hero, a Superman, or a savior. But he had never thought of himself that way. He was just an ordinary man who did something that anyone could do if they had enough courage and determination. The most beautiful thing was that this message, this simple idea, had spread, touching distant hearts and awakening within them a sense of what courage truly meant. When Keanu looked up, he noticed a little girl standing outside the window. Her hair was neatly braided, and her light blue dress fluttered gently in the breeze. She clutched a worn-out teddy bear in her small hands, her bright eyes fixed on him. She smiled widely and waved through the glass. A simple gesture, yet it held so much admiration and faith. Keanu raised an eyebrow and returned her smile. The girl hugged her bear tighter and ran toward her mother, her tiny feet skipping like a gust of wind. Keanu watched her go, the smile lingering on his face just a little longer. In that moment, he understood. Sometimes, even the smallest actions have the power to change the world. Lifting his coffee cup, he took a small sip, letting the gentle bitterness wash over his tongue. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, its golden light casting long shadows over the street. The phone buzzed again. He unlocked it to see a message from an old friend, accompanied by a link. "Have you seen this? Don't watch. Do his work in miracles." Keanu clicked the link, and a social media post appeared. "One day, I'll dare to do what I've always been afraid of. Thank you, Keanu. Don't watch, do." Scrolling further, thousands of small stories emerged. Young people standing up to stop bullying at school. Adults protecting the vulnerable on crowded streets. A young man posted a photo of himself fixing an old man's wheelchair, captioned, "No heroes needed, just someone willing to act." Keanu quietly closed the phone. He didn't need to read any more. Every small act and every simple word showed him that his message hadn't just been heard, it was being lived. The evening sky darkened. Keanu stood up, grabbed his jacket draped over the chair, and stepped out of the cafe. The chime of the doorbell rang softly as he pushed it open. A cool breeze swept through, carrying the city's sounds into the night. He blended into the flow of people on the street, his steps unhurried and calm, just another ordinary figure among ordinary people. But in his heart, a small flame still burned. Not bright or blinding, but enough to warm and illuminate everything around it. And as night embraced the city, up in the vast sky, the stars began to shimmer. They were tiny specks of light in the immense darkness, but together they formed a brilliant galaxy. In the same way, a single, small action, a courageous choice, could ignite an entire movement, and ordinary people, if brave enough, could achieve something extraordinary. Keanu Reeves knew that he was just one such person. The story of the flight and Keanu Reeves's actions is not just a tale of facing danger, but a powerful reminder to us all. Do not stand still when you see something wrong. Do not turn your back when someone needs you. A small act can lead to a great change. In life, we don't need to be heroes, possess superhuman strength, or seek fame. By simply choosing to act, you become a light in the darkness, hope in despair. Remember, doing nothing is a choice, but choosing to act can change the world. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us, what would you do when faced with a situation that requires courage? Thank you for being with us. Remember, don't just watch, act.